I learned early that in my family, advice was expensive talk given to me instead of anything useful. When I was 16 and needed money for a school trip, my father looked over his glasses and said, "A man should learn that not every door opens for him." When Daniel wanted a new phone that same week, my mother smiled and said, "He needs it for school. Don't make this a big deal." I made it through college with part-time jobs, late rent, and cheap meals that tasted like punishment. Daniel made it through life with cushions under every fall. My parents called that love when it was for him and character building when it was for me. By 28, I had stopped expecting fairness. I worked full-time at a shipping office, took extra weekend shifts, and told myself I was fine as long as I could pay my bills on time. Then my landlord knocked on my door on a Tuesday night and ruined that lie. "Ethan, I wanted to tell you in person," Mr. Baines said. "I'm selling the building." I stared at him. "Selling it?" He nodded. "You've been a good tenant. I'm sorry. You'll have 30 days. 30? I know. I pushed for more. The buyer wants it cleared fast. I laughed once, but nothing about it was funny. Right. Of course. Are you all right? No, I said, but I'll figure something out. That was what I always said. I'll figure something out. Nobody ever offered to figure it out with me. That night I sat on the edge of my bed, looking at the crack in the wall above the lamp, and did the math 3 times. First month deposit, moving costs, storage, food, gas. The numbers looked back at me like they were enjoying it. I called my mother. She answered on the 4th ring. "Hi, sweetheart." "Hey, Mom. You sound tired." "I am." "Well, life does that." I closed my eyes. "My landlord is selling the apartment. I have to be out in 30 days. She was quiet for a second. "Oh, that's stressful." "Yeah. So what's your plan?" I almost laughed. "I'm still working on that. You should have savings for emergencies, Ethan." "I know. This is why I always tell you to think ahead." I pressed my fingers against my forehead. "Mom, I'm not calling for a lecture." "I'm not lecturing you. I'm guiding you." I let that sit between us. "Can I come by tomorrow? I need to talk to you and Dad." Another pause. "About what?" "About where I'm going to stay." Her voice changed, just slightly, softer, but careful. "Come by after dinner." The next evening, I drove to the house I had grown up in, the same house where every room felt warmer for Daniel than it ever had for me. The porch light was on. My mother opened the door with a dish towel in her hand. "You made it," she said. "Traffic. Dinner's almost done." "I'm not here to eat." She stepped aside anyway. "Your father's in the den." I found him in his chair, watching the news with the volume too high. He muted it when he saw me. "You look worn out," he said. "Good to see you too." He pointed at the couch. "Sit." I stayed standing. "I'll keep it short." My mother came in behind me. "You always sound defensive before anyone says anything." "Maybe there's a reason for that." My father sighed. "What's going on?" I swallowed. Asking them for help felt like putting my hand near a dog that had bitten me before. "My landlord sold the building. I have 30 days to leave." "And?" my father said. "And I can't afford a new place that fast." He leaned back. "Then you need to pick up extra work." "I already work 6 days a week." "There's always more a man can do." My mother folded her arms. "Hard seasons teach us the most." I looked at both of them and felt that old, familiar ache crawl up my throat. "I'm not asking for a life lesson." My father's eyes narrowed. "Then what are you asking for?" I forced the words out. "Can I stay here for a little while? Just until I find something?" The room went still. My mother looked at my father before she looked at me. That told me everything. Finally, she said, "Ethan, moving back home at your age would not be healthy." I stared at her. "Healthy for who?" "For you," she said quickly. "You need independence." I laughed, low and tired. "I've had independence since I was a kid." My father stood. "Watch your tone." My tone? I said. I'm about to lose my place. And panic solves nothing, he said. I looked from him to my mother and nodded slowly. Right. Advice. The front door opened and Daniel walked in, grinning, keys spinning around his finger. You would not believe the day I had. Mom rushed to him. Did you talk to the bank? He smiled. Yeah, Dad covered it. I'm good. I should have left the second Daniel walked in, smiling. Instead, I stood there, still hoping somebody in that room would remember I was their son too. Dad clapped Daniel on the shoulder. See? I told you I'd handle it. Daniel dropped his keys into the bowl by the door. You saved me again. Mom smiled. That's what family does. The words landed in my chest like a brick. I looked at Daniel. What bank? He glanced at me, then at them. My car loan. It was behind. How behind? He shrugged. A couple months. Dad answered for him. It's taken care of. I stared at him. You paid it? It was necessary. I laughed. Necessary. Mom turned to me. Don't start. Start what? This tone, she said. This bitterness. I looked around the room. Same framed family photos, same polished table, same smell of lemon cleaner. Nothing had changed except me finally seeing it clearly. Daniel dropped onto the couch. Can we not make tonight dramatic? I looked at him. Dramatic? I just asked if I could stay here because I'm losing my apartment. Dad folded his arms. And we answered. No, I said. You rejected me. We set a boundary, Mom said calmly. That calm voice made it worse. She stepped closer. Ethan, hard times build character. I stared at her. Then Daniel must be made of glass. Enough, Dad snapped. No, I said, not enough. I'm trying to understand something. Dad's jaw tightened. Then understand this. A grown man solves his own problems. I nodded once. Unless he's Daniel. Mom sighed. This is exactly why we didn't want you staying here. You bring hostility into everything. Hostility, I repeated. I asked for help. Dad pointed at the floor. You are not entitled to rescue. I swallowed the heat rising into my throat. And he is? Daniel leaned back and crossed his arms. Why are you acting like I asked for special treatment? I looked at him. Didn't you? He scoffed. I hit a rough patch. So did I. It's not the same. I laughed, sharp and ugly. No, you're right, it's not. When you hit a rough patch, they open the vault. When I hit one, they open a sermon. Mom's face hardened. You are being unfair. I stepped toward the dining table. There were envelopes, a calculator, and a folder near Dad's chair. I glanced down, and one line jumped out at me. Transfer confirmation. Another page sat half under it. Monthly rent arrears. Then I saw Daniel's name again. I picked up the top paper. Dad barked, "Put that down." But I had already seen enough. I looked up slowly. You paid his rent too? Nobody answered. I flipped to the next page. And his car? My voice dropped. And this, what is this? Business recovery contribution? Daniel stood up. Give me that. I pulled the papers back. You gave him money for that stupid business again. Dad stepped forward. Watch your mouth. That failed last year, I said. You told me there was no money when I needed help with my certification course. But there's money for this? Mom lifted her chin. Daniel was trying to build something. I stared at her. And I wasn't? Her lips parted, but nothing came out. That silence hurt more than an insult. Daniel snatched the papers from my hand. You're making this weird. Weird, I said. You're standing in a house where they just paid your rent, your car loan, and your failed investment while telling me struggle is good for me. He threw the papers back on the table. Maybe because I actually take risks. I blinked at him. You call this risk? You fall, and they build you a mattress before you hit the floor. Dad's face went red. That is enough. I turned to him. Why? Because I'm finally saying it? Mom shook her head slowly. You've always had this issue with Daniel. I felt something inside me go cold. My issue is not with Daniel. My issue is with the two of you. Dad stared at me. You're jealous." I almost smiled. Jealous. "Yes," Mom said. "You resent your brother." I looked at her. "I resent being told to drown while you teach him how to float on my piece of wood." Daniel rolled his eyes. "There you go again, making everything miserable." I ignored him. "Tell me the truth for once. Why do I always get lectures while he gets everything I need?" Mom crossed her arms. "Because you're stronger." The room went quiet. I stared at her. Dad didn't correct it. Daniel didn't even look ashamed. Because you're stronger. That was it. Daniel got help because he was weaker. I got pain because I could survive it. I bent down, picked up my duffel bag from beside the couch, and slung it over my shoulder. Dad said, "Walking out won't solve anything." I looked at the front door. Neither did staying. Mom's voice softened. "Ethan, don't be dramatic." I opened the door. Behind me, Daniel said, "He'll calm down." No one came after me. I walked to my car in silence, carrying the bag, the humiliation, and one ugly truth I could not unknow. My family didn't just love Daniel more. They loved needing him, saving him, protecting him. And they loved testing whether I could survive without any of it alone. I spent the first night in my car, pretending it was temporary. I parked behind a 24-hour grocery store, leaned my seat back, and told myself I had survived worse. The lie almost worked until 3 in the morning, when my neck cramped, my legs went numb, and headlights kept sliding across the windshield like accusations. By 6, I was sitting in a gym locker room with a towel around my shoulders, staring at my phone and avoiding my own reflection. A text from work blinked across the screen. "Marcus, you opening today?" Me. "Yeah, on my way." That was the easy part. Showing up had always been the easy part. Falling apart quietly was a skill I had practiced my whole life. At work, I moved boxes, checked invoices, answered calls, and kept my face still. Nobody asked questions, which helped. Nobody except Marcus. He waited until lunch, when the others had stepped out. "You look terrible," he said. "Thanks. I mean it seriously." "I know." He leaned against the counter and studied me with the kind of silence that made lying feel childish. Marcus was in his 40s, broad-shouldered, calm, the kind of man who never wasted words and never raised his voice unless something really mattered. "You sick?" he asked. "No." "You in trouble?" I gave a short laugh. "Depends how you define trouble." He didn't smile. "Try me." I looked at the vending machine instead of him. "Lost my apartment." His voice stayed level. "When?" 3 days ago." "And where are you staying?" I hesitated. That was answer enough. "In the car?" he asked. I hated how fast my eyes burned. "Yeah." Marcus let out a slow breath. "How long?" "Since I left my parents' place." "Why'd you leave?" I almost said, "Because they didn't want me there." Instead, I said, "Because I'm an idiot who keeps expecting different people from the same people." Marcus nodded once, like that made perfect sense. "You got somewhere to go tonight?" "I'll manage." That wasn't my question. I stayed quiet. He pulled his keys from his pocket. "You can take my couch." I looked up. "Marcus, no speech," he said. "No pride, just yes or no." The answer got stuck in my throat because nobody had ever made help sound that simple. "Why?" I asked. He frowned. "Because you need a place to sleep." I laughed under my breath. "You say that like it's normal." "It is normal," he said. "What's not normal is acting like asking for help is some moral failure." I looked away. That night I followed him to a small brick house on the quiet side of town. He handed me a blanket, pointed to the couch and said, "Bathroom's down the hall. Coffee starts at 6. Lock the door if I'm out before you." No lecture, no performance, no reminder that I owed him my character growth in exchange for a pillow. I stood there holding the blanket like it meant more than fabric should. Marcus looked back at me. "You all right?" "Yeah," I said, then shook my head. "No, I just don't know what to do with this." "With what?" "This." I glanced around. "Being helped." He leaned against the doorway. "Who taught you that help always comes with a price?" I laughed once, but it came out tired. My parents, probably. He waited. So I told him. I told him about birthdays where Daniel got gaming consoles and I got talks about gratitude. I told him about the year I asked for help with college books and Dad said, "You'll value your education more if you earn it yourself." 2 months later, Daniel crashed his car and they replaced it before the insurance check cleared. I told him about calling home after a brutal breakup, just wanting someone to say, "That hurts, and I'm here." Mom had said, "Pain teaches us who we are." Marcus rubbed a hand over his jaw. "And they call that love?" "They call it making me strong." He looked at me for a long second. "Kid, there's a difference between raising someone strong and leaving them alone." That landed hard. I sat on the edge of the couch. I keep replaying everything. Every birthday, every bill, every time I asked for something small and got a sermon instead. "Because now the pattern's obvious," Marcus said. I nodded. "Yeah. You know what it sounds like to me?" "What?" "Neglect," he said, just dressed up in respectable words. I stared at the floor. My phone buzzed near midnight. I picked it up, expecting work. It was Mom. "I hope you reflect on your attitude." I read it once. Then again. "No. Are you safe?" "No. Where are you sleeping?" "No. Come back and let's talk." Just that. Marcus looked over from the recliner. "Bad?" I locked the screen. "No," I said quietly. "Just clear." For the first time in my life, I didn't want to explain myself. I didn't want to earn love, soften truth, or crawl back toward people who only noticed my pain when it interrupted their comfort. I set the phone face down, lay back on the couch, and understood something cold and freeing. Maybe I had spent years calling it love because admitting the truth hurt worse. Tonight, I stopped. By the next week, I stopped checking my phone every 10 minutes. That was the first change. The second was harder. I stopped waiting for my parents to become the people I had needed when I was 18, 21, then 28. Every time my screen lit up, part of me expected an impossible message. "Ethan, come home. Ethan, we were wrong. Ethan, you mattered." It never came. Instead, life got practical. Marcus gave me 2 weeks on his couch and treated me like a man having a rough month, not a cautionary tale. I worked my regular hours, picked up every extra shift I could, and wrote numbers in a small notebook until they looked less like panic and more like a plan. One night, Marcus walked into the kitchen while I was eating peanut butter from a spoon. "That dinner?" he asked. "It's efficient, it's depressing, it's affordable." He looked back at me. "You always this stubborn?" "Only when I'm embarrassed." He nodded once. "Good. Means you still know what dignity is. Bad news is, dignity doesn't cover rent." I smiled despite myself. "You got a point?" "Yeah. My cousin Lena manages a property office. One of her tenants is moving out of a studio next month. Cheap place. Not pretty, but solid." I sat up straighter. "How cheap?" "Cheap enough that you stopped breathing for a second." "Can she hold it?" "She can meet you first. That's better than a promise." That afternoon I met Lena outside a narrow brick building with chipped paint and flower boxes. She stood near the steps with a clipboard under one arm, hair pinned back, expression calm in a way that made me straighten my shoulders. "You're Ethan," she said. "Yeah." "I'm Lena. Marcus said you work hard and hate asking for favors." "That sounds like him." She gave me a small smile. "Good. I prefer accurate introductions." I laughed, then followed her upstairs. The studio was tiny. One room, a narrow kitchenette, a bathroom that looked like it had survived decades out of spite. The window faced an alley, and the radiator hissed. Still, I looked around and thought, I could survive here. Lena watched me take it in. "I'm going to be honest. It's not charming." "It has walls," I said. "That puts you ahead of most listings right now." I ran a hand over my neck. "I don't have the full deposit yet." She checked her clipboard, then looked at me. "What can you do?" I almost said, "I can work until I disappear." Instead, I told the truth. "I can pay part now, the rest in 2 weeks. I can prove income. I can give references. I won't wreck the place. I won't pay late. And I won't make you regret giving me a shot." She studied me for a moment. Then she said, "You sound tired." I let out a breath. I am. That wasn't a test, she said. I'm just telling you what I hear. I nodded slowly. Most people hear attitude first. Most people like hearing themselves talk. That landed so gently I almost didn't know what to do with it. For the next 3 weeks, I built my life like somebody repairing a house with bare hands. I opened the office, closed the warehouse, skipped takeout, sold an old guitar, cancelled everything that wasn't survival, and signed up for the certification course I had put off for 2 years. When I clicked submit on the course payment, my chest tightened. I remembered being 24, asking Dad if he could help me cover the fee. He had looked at me and said, "If you really wanted it, you would find a way." 3 days later, he bought Daniel a watch to celebrate some business idea. Now I found my own way. Mom posted pictures online that month. Family dinner, Daniel smiling beside Dad. Her caption said, "So grateful for my boys." I stared at it until my vision blurred. My boys. Not even absence could make them honest. Marcus saw me looking at my phone during break. "You keep scratching the same wound, it won't close." "I know. You going back?" I put the phone away. "No." That answer surprised me how true it felt. By the end of the month, I had the money. But I had it. Lena met me at the office with the lease papers spread across her desk. "You sure?" she asked. "Once you sign, this shoebox is yours." I looked at the page, then at her. Nobody's ever asked me that like my answer mattered. It matters now. So I signed. When I unlocked the studio that evening, the room looked even smaller, empty. My footsteps echoed. The air smelled like dust and old paint. I set my bag down, closed the door, and stood there in the silence. Then I sat on the floor and cried. Not because it was sad, because after years of being told to earn everything alone while watching other people handed what I needed, this was the first thing that was truly mine. 3 months after I signed the lease, my mother called me on a Wednesday afternoon. I stared at her name until the phone almost stopped ringing. Then I answered. "Hello?" "Ethan, hi," she said too brightly. "I was just thinking about you." I leaned back in my chair at work. "That's new." She gave a small laugh that sounded rehearsed. "Don't be like that." "How should I be?" There was a pause. "I miss hearing your voice." I looked across the office. Marcus was loading forms into a cabinet. Lena had texted me earlier about a rent receipt. My life had become quiet in a way that once would have scared me. Now it felt earned. "What do you want, Mom?" I asked. "That's a harsh way to greet your mother." "It's an honest one." She exhaled softly. "We haven't talked in a while. You sent one message. I was upset." "You were offended," I said. "That's different." Another pause. I could hear dishes in the background and the faint sound of the television. The house still sounded the same. "How have you been?" she asked. "Working." "That's all?" "No, sleeping indoors too. Big month for me." "Ethan." "What?" "You always do this." "Do what?" "Turn everything into a criticism." I almost laughed. "You called me." She lowered her voice. "Your father's under a lot of stress." There it was. I rolled my chair back from the desk. "Why?" "It's just family pressure." "Daniel?" Silence answered first. Then she said, "Your brother has had some setbacks." "Setbacks cost money?" "That's not fair." "No," I said. "Neither was sleeping in my car." Her tone sharpened. "You do not need to keep bringing that up." "I probably do, actually." She went quiet again, then changed tactics. "We're all trying our best." I looked at the invoice spreadsheet on my screen and felt strangely calm. "If that's your best, I'm glad I stopped waiting for it." She said my name the way she used to when company was over, and she wanted me to behave. "Daniel got into a bad business arrangement." "He had another business?" "He was trying to recover from the last one." "With whose money?" "That's not your concern." I smiled without humor. "Then neither am I." She inhaled sharply. "You've become cold." "No," I said. "I've become expensive to ignore." She hung up 3 minutes later after saying, "I called because I love you." in the same tone people use when they want credit for effort, not truth. That night, Lena dropped by my studio with takeout containers and a look on her face that said she already knew I was in my head. "Bad day?" she asked. "My mother remembered I exist." "That usually means bad news." I set the cartons on the counter. "Daniel's crashing again." She handed me a fork. "And they want you to what? Clap?" "Not yet. Right now she's just circling the runway." Lena sat on the edge of the windowsill. "You sound less shaken than before." "I am." "Good." I looked at her. "That's it? What do you want me to say?" "I don't know. That it still hurts, maybe?" "It probably does," she said. "But hurt and helpless aren't the same thing." I sat across from her with my food untouched. "Sometimes I hate that they still get inside my head." She nodded. "That's what family does when they've had years of access." My mom kept saying Dad's stressed, like I'm supposed to feel sorry for him. "Do you?" I thought about it. A little. Then I remember he watched me ask for a couch like I was begging for weakness. Lena rested her elbows on her knees. "Listen to me carefully. Some people only look for the quiet child when the loud one burns the house down." The room went still. I looked at her. "Say that again?" She did. I repeated it under my breath, like I was testing whether it belonged to me now. 2 days later, my father called. He never called unless something mattered to him. I answered on the 4th ring. "Dad?" "Ethan." His voice sounded rougher than I remembered. "What's going on?" I asked. "I'd rather discuss it in person." I leaned against the sink. "That depends." "On what? On whether this is about me or about Daniel?" He was quiet long enough to answer without words. Then he said, "Can you meet me Saturday?" I closed my eyes for a second. Months ago I would have heard hope in that question. Now I heard pressure, need, pride trying not to sound desperate. "Where?" I asked. "The cafe on Mercer." "What time?" 10. I looked around my tiny studio, my table, my work bag, my course notes, my life. "I'll be there," I said. After we hung up, I stood in the silence and let the truth settle where hope used to live. He didn't want to see me because he missed his son. He wanted to see me because the golden child was finally costing them more than they could carry now alone. I met them at the cafe on Mercer because I refused to sit in that house again and pretend the walls weren't built out of old humiliations. Dad was already there when I arrived. Mom sat across from him, both hands around a coffee cup she wasn't drinking. For the first time in my life, they looked smaller to me, older too, tired in a way that no amount of careful posture could hide. Dad stood when he saw me. "Ethan." I sat down without offering a hug. "You said this mattered." Mom tried to smile. "It's good to see you." "No," I said. "It's sudden to see me. That's different." Dad cleared his throat. "You've always had a sharp tongue. And you've always had a speech ready. Let's save time." Mom flinched. Dad looked at the table, then back at me. "Daniel is in trouble," he said. I almost laughed. "That narrows it down how?" "This is serious," Mom whispered. I leaned back. So was being homeless. Dad's jaw shifted, but he kept his voice level. "His last business failed worse than he told us." "How much worse?" He hesitated. "He owes people." "That means money," I said. "How much?" Mom finally answered, "Too much." I looked from one of them to the other. "And?" Dad clasped his hands. "We've done what we can." "Meaning?" He spoke like each word cost him pride. "We covered his rent, his car, the business loss, then another loan, then credit card balances." Mom added quickly, "We thought if we got him stable, he could recover." I nodded slowly. "And did he?" Neither of them spoke. A server came by. I ordered black coffee just to have something to do with my face. When she left, Dad exhaled. "The mortgage is behind," he said. "We used savings to keep Daniel afloat." I stared at him. "Your savings." Mom looked down. "And part of the retirement account." Something in me went cold and clear. "You tore apart your future to keep him from meeting his own." Dad's voice sharpened. He's our son. I leaned forward. So am I. Silence. The coffee arrived. I wrapped my hand around the cup and let the heat anchor me. Dad spoke more carefully now. We are asking for temporary help. I looked at him, then at Mom, then back at him again. Financial help, I said. Mom's eyes filled. Just until we can breathe. The cruelty of it hit me so hard I smiled. Dad frowned. What's funny? You are, I said. Both of you. Mom whispered. Ethan. No, say it clearly, I said. You told me struggle builds character. You told me a man solves his own problems. You told me rescue was weakness. And now you want me to save the child you never let struggle and the parents who taught him he'd never have to. Dad's face hardened. This is not the time for old grievances. I laughed once. Old grievances? You mean my life? Mom started crying, soft and immediate. We did the best we could. I looked at her and felt the familiar pull to comfort her. For the first time, I didn't obey it. No, I said. You did what was easiest for your conscience. Dad's hand flattened against the table. Watch yourself. I spent years watching myself, I shot back. Watching every need, every tone, every request, because I knew the answer before I asked. Daniel got rent, cars, bailouts, second chances. I got lectures. When I needed one place to land, you called it weakness. When he wanted another chance to fail, you called it family. Don't ask me to admire that now any longer. Mom shook her head. You were always stronger. I stared at her. That was never love. That was convenience. Dad's voice dropped. Are you going to help us or not? There it was. No apology. No truth. Just the real question, finally naked. No, I said. Mom gasped like I had struck her. Dad leaned in. Think carefully. I have. You would let your family drown? I stood up. You already tested whether I could. Mom grabbed my wrist. Please. I looked down at her hand until she let go. Then a voice behind me said, Wow, so this is who you are now. I turned. Daniel stood near the counter, coat half zipped, expression full of outrage he hadn't earned. He walked over fast. You're really going to sit here and watch them suffer? I faced him. You mean suffer your consequences? He scoffed. You've wanted this forever. No, I said. I wanted fairness. You wouldn't recognize it if it repossessed your car. Dad snapped. Enough! But Daniel kept going. You're bitter. That's all this is. Bitter and selfish. I looked at him, calm in a way that surprised even me. Maybe, still no. His face flushed. They sacrificed everything for us. For you, I said. They sacrificed me for you. Mom started crying harder. Dad looked away. Daniel opened his mouth again, but I was done. I picked up my coat. Figure it out, I said. I hear struggle builds character. Then I walked out before anyone could turn my pain into another lesson, and in that refusal, I finally took my life back. Daniel started collapsing in places my parents could not cover with checks. I heard about the breakup first. Mom called on a Sunday evening, voice thin and tired. Claire left him. I stood by my kitchen sink, staring at a dish I had not washed yet. Who's Claire? His girlfriend. The one he said was different? Yes. I leaned against the counter. Why are you telling me this? She hesitated. Because things are hard right now. They were hard when I was sleeping in my car. I know, she said softly, and the softness irritated me more than anger would have. No, I said. You know it now because your favorite solution stopped working. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, He lied to us. About what? About how bad everything was. The debts, the loans, the business. Claire found messages from people asking for money. She left. I closed my eyes. Daniel always had charm when consequences were still far away. I wondered what his face looked like now that they were sitting beside him at breakfast. Mom's voice shook. Your father's barely sleeping. That must be difficult. Ethan, please. I rubbed my forehead. What do you want from me? Nothing, she said too quickly. I keep thinking about when you were little and used to wait by the window when your father got home. The memory hit before I could block it. I had been 8, holding a spelling test with a gold star on top, convinced that if I stood there long enough, somebody would be proud in the right way. Mom kept talking. You always tried so hard. I swallowed. That is not an apology. I know. But she kept sending messages after that. Long ones, memories, fragments, half confessions wrapped in soft language. I should have protected you more. Maybe we expected too much from you because you seemed capable. I see now that we may have been unfair. May have. Marcus read one over my shoulder during lunch and snorted. That's not remorse. That's careful editing. She's trying. She's trying not to say the ugliest part out loud. I put my phone away. I know. He looked at me across the break room table. You don't owe pain a reunion just because it learned better vocabulary. That stayed with me all afternoon. A few days later, Dad called. He never texted. He sounded tired enough to make me picture him older than I wanted to. I wanted to say something, he said. I sat on the edge of my bed. Go ahead. He cleared his throat. Maybe we were too hard on you. I waited. That's it? I asked. He exhaled through his nose. I'm not good at this. Lo, I said, you were good at lectures. Silence. Then he said, you handled yourself, more than I gave you credit for. I looked at the wall for a long moment. That still isn't the same as saying you were wrong. Another pause. Then, stiffly, painfully, he said, I was wrong in some ways. In some ways. I almost laughed. When I told Lena, she sat across from me in the studio with her knees pulled up in my second-hand chair. How do you feel? She asked. Like a starving person being handed half a cracker and told it's a feast. She nodded. That sounds accurate. I hate that part of me still wants more. Of course it does, she said. Neglected kids don't stop wanting their parents. They just get better at pretending. I looked down at my hands. What if I forgive them? Forgiveness is fine, she said. Surrender is different. The words settled into me. It felt clean, sharp, and honest in a way guilt never had. That weekend, I drove to my parents' house for the first time since the cafe, not because I was going back, but because I needed to see the place without the hunger I used to bring to it. Daniel's car was gone. Dad's truck sat crooked in the driveway. The porch light was off, even though dusk had started folding over the street. Mom opened the door and froze. Ethan. I'm not staying, I said. Her eyes filled instantly. Okay. I stepped inside anyway. The hallway looked smaller. The pictures on the wall felt staged now, like evidence from a trial nobody had wanted to hold. Dad came out of the den. You should have called. I didn't come for comfort. He nodded once, like that made sense. Mom touched the back of a chair. Do you want coffee? No. Nobody knew where to put their hands. I looked around the living room, the staircase, the dining table where so many of my needs had been translated into lessons instead of love. I had spent years thinking this house rejected me because I wasn't enough. Standing there now, I finally understood something simpler and sadder. This place had taught me how little I was allowed to ask for. It wasn't home. It was where I learned to survive on almost nothing. A year later, my life still wasn't perfect, but it was mine. That difference mattered more than perfection ever could. I had a better position at work, a certification that finally opened doors, and a studio apartment that no longer felt temporary. I had dishes in the sink, laundry in a chair, and rent paid by my own hands. Some nights I still woke up angry. Some mornings I still heard my parents' voices in my head before I heard my own. But the anger no longer drove me. It just rode in the back. Marcus called that progress. Lena called it healing with better shoes. I called it peace on installment. On a Thursday evening, my mother texted me, "Can we see you? Just us. No pressure." I read it twice, then finished the report on my laptop before answering. Tomorrow, 1 hour. She replied in less than a minute. Thank you. They came to my apartment the next evening. That mattered. I was not stepping into their house again for a conversation that should have happened years ago. Mom looked nervous when I opened the door. Dad looked like he had rehearsed a speech and then lost it in the car. Come in, I said. Mom stepped inside slowly, looking around. Dad followed, hands in his coat pockets. This is nice, Mom said. It's small, I answered. It feels warm, she said. I gestured to the table. Sit. Nobody spoke for a moment. I stayed standing until they sat first. Dad cleared his throat. How have you been? Better. Mum looked at me with wet eyes. You look better. I am. Dad folded his hands. We wanted to talk without conflict. I almost smiled. That depends on what you say. Mum looked down. Daniel moved out. I leaned against the counter. To where? Dad answered. A smaller place across town. With what money? He's working now, Dad said. Mum gave a sad laugh. He doesn't have much choice anymore. I pictured Daniel without the old cushion under him and felt no triumph, only distance. That was the karma, not ruin, reality. Dad looked around the apartment. You built something? Yes. He nodded once. We see that. Mom gripped her hands together. We didn't come here to ask for anything. That would be a nice change. She winced but kept going. We came because too much time has passed, and I don't want to keep pretending words don't matter. I waited. Her voice shook. I thought making you strong was love. I thought trusting you to handle more was respect. I told myself that every time you looked disappointed. I told myself you were capable, and Daniel needed more, and someday you would understand. I looked at her without helping. She started crying anyway. I see now how cruel that sounds. Dad stared at the table. I said, the deepest wound was never that you helped Daniel. Mom looked up quickly. It was that you watched me struggle, I said, and called your inaction love. The room went still. Mom covered her mouth. Dad closed his eyes once. When I needed help, you gave me speeches. When I needed comfort, you gave me lessons. When I needed one safe place to land, you gave Daniel my place in your heart and told me to be proud of surviving outside it. Mom was crying openly now. I'm sorry. I believed she meant it, but sorrow was not the same as repair. Dad finally spoke. I thought pressure would make you stronger. It did, I said, but not because you loved me well, because I had no choice. He nodded slowly. I don't have advice left, he said. That line almost broke something in me, because it was the first honest thing he had ever offered without wrapping it in authority. Mom whispered, Can you forgive us? I looked at both of them and realized I did not need to rush the answer. I can stop carrying you around inside every wound, I said. That's what I'm doing. But forgiveness isn't pretending none of it happened, and it isn't going back to who I was just because you finally see it. Mom wiped her face. Dad said nothing. I took a breath. Being chosen late is not the same as being loved right. Neither of them argued. That was how I knew they had finally heard me. They stayed 20 more minutes. We talked about practical things after that. Dad's blood pressure, Mom's garden, Daniel's new job stocking inventory at a hardware store. No miracles happened. No perfect apology arrived to rewrite my childhood. Still, when they stood to leave, I felt lighter. Mom hesitated at the door. Thank you for letting us come. I did it for me, I said. She nodded. I know. Dad lingered 1 second longer. You did well, Ethan. The old version of me would have lived on that sentence for months. This version just said, Good night, Dad. After they left, I locked the door and stood in the quiet. I did not feel victorious. I felt finished. That was better. My phone rang 10 minutes later. Marcus, I answered. Yeah? You eating with us or writing poetry in the dark again? He asked. I laughed. Who's us? Lena's voice came through in the background. Me, obviously. And if you say no, I'm stealing your fries next time. I sat on the couch and looked around my apartment, my lamp, my books, my half-dead plant, the life that had been built by people who showed up instead of explaining why they couldn't.
"I'm coming," I said. Marcus grunted. "Good." Lena added, "And Ethan?" "Yeah?" "You sound lighter." I smiled. "I am." After the call ended, I grabbed my keys and shut off the kitchen light. Closure, I had learned, was not getting the apology I once dreamed about. Sometimes closure was no longer needing it. And family, I finally understood, was not always who raised you. Sometimes it was simply who showed up.